Bill and
Right here.
falling down in
Hey, I got 15 minutes.
You know, I was gonna get soda, and I just didn't
Oh.
get to go in there, so I gotta make sure I'm ready.
All right. Is everybody set? All right, thanks.
Oh my God, if you don't, I'll get something else.
You gonna roll your eyes at him? All right. I'd like to call this meeting to order.
Thank you.
This is the regularly scheduled meeting for the Apex Town Council, November 19th, 2019. I'd like to welcome everybody here. As I usually do, I'll either, during invocation, I'll either say something or ask someone to open us. Tonight, I would just like to simply ask everyone to think about where they acquire their wisdom, where their common sense comes from, where their love for their fellow man comes from. Tap into that place, because tonight we have the town's business in front of us, and I'd like for everyone to take a moment and go to that place with me. Thank you. Please stand and join me to pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks to everyone for coming today. If you missed it, the agenda is out there on the podium in a white packet like this. Feel free to go grab one or look down at your neighbor's packet if they will allow you to. Also, for tonight, if you intend to speak during the public forum or during one of the public hearings, you need to put your name on one of the yellow sheets or the blue sheet as appropriate. Please select the correct one, so pay attention to the heading at the top. You have about 10 minutes to put your name on those sheets, and then they will be collected by the clerk. And the last thing is, if you plan to speak, you need to make sure you're familiar with these speaking guidelines. They are supplied to you out there on the podium. If you didn't get one and you signed up, please go grab one now so you can be familiar with it by the time your turn comes up. I'd like to now move into presentations, and the first one is for the Government Finance Officer Association's Award for Excellence. Comes in this very nice binder with gold lettering, see? And this is the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting presented to the town of Apex, North Carolina, and it is dated June 30th, 2018 for the CAFR, which is the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. Took me about 8 years to be able to pronounce it correctly, but I'm very proud of our finance department. This is, according to Vance, this is now our 25th consecutive, and it is roughly a rare thing to get one in and of itself, and to have a few in a row is also rare enough, but to have 25 in a row is kind of leading the pack, wouldn't you say? Yes. And he's modest about it, but he knows, because he's watched finances for municipalities all across the state. So thank you very much. Come on up, Vance, and I'll come down and present it to you. And Suzanne is coming up here too. Hey, Suzanne. Good. Thank you very much. And I'm gonna present this to you like this. I don't know. Do we have anybody taking? We got no photographer.
Wait.
Oh, is somebody coming? We'll just stand here awkwardly. Not too awkward. It's not too awkward, because Suzanne was my neighbor for years when my kids were little. Awesome. Thank you. Feel free to say a word or two if you like.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'd like to begin by thanking the mayor, members of the council, and our managers for their support in our efforts to obtain this, and the importance they place on transparency for our citizens to be well aware of how we operate and how we're handling their money. I want to thank also Keith Joyce of Joyce & Companies here with us this evening for all the things they do and all the help they give us in obtaining this. The person I think probably that is most responsible for the town getting this award is Suzanne and all the work she does on that, she and her staff. And certainly we appreciate all she does. If I take just a moment, I'll mention that although she was not involved with the 2018 CAFR, we do have a new member of the accounting staff with us this evening, Preetha Nayak. And she's addition, our utility accountant. She worked with the Local Government Commission for many years also, and also with the Utility Department of the City of Raleigh. This is also a reflection on the entire town. All departments contribute to this, so I just want to thank you for this.
Well, there's quite a precedent set there, and we'd hate to drop that ball, wouldn't we? All right, so now we move into our second presentation. This is Mr. Keith Joyce of Joyce & Company, the independent auditor. Mr. Joyce, good to see you again, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Pleased to be with you again tonight. The front, I've got 3 or 4 documents I'll go through briefly with you, but the first one of those just basically summarizes some of the larger numbers in this year's CAFRA. But I'll jump to the bottom of that page first, since we're dealing with the certificate award we just mentioned. Nationwide, roughly 10 to 12% of the municipalities and counties get this award in any given year. So a 25-year string is quite a run with that. Some other just notes about the audit highlight sheet. The numbers you'll see here have all been rounded to thousands. The page numbers are bracketed to the side of that, and they all refer to the June 30th, 2019 CAFRA, which is about a 140-page document that you've got in your agenda packet. To start at the top of that real briefly, you'll see your cash balance has increased significantly from the prior year, going up $15 million, from $141 million to $157 million roughly. The main reason for that were just basically your profits dealing in a for-business type environment, but we call here your change in net position. Going through it in a little more detail by the various functions of the town, you'll see the next section we deal with fixed assets. Our capital assets, these are governmental. Net assets increased roughly $57 million this year. A large part of that is the contributed capital that you receive each year in the form of streets and infrastructure. Your water and sewer net assets decreased slightly. That's a result of, once again, capital contributions, but net of current depreciation. And then your electric capital assets increased roughly $2 million. To focus on the general fund, you'll see your fund balance this year increased roughly $5 million from the prior year, from $34.8 million in the prior year to $39.8 million during the current year. Your unassigned fund balance, which is what's available to be spent, increased also by $4.2 million, from $21.8 million to $26 million. And your net change in fund balance was $4,996,000. Your unassigned fund balance is a percentage of your budgeted expenditures or actual expenditures was 49% for the year. Your total fund balance is a percentage of your total expenditures is 74.9%. What that means is basically you've got 3/4 of a year of reserves at any given time. Water and sewer fund, you see your cash balance increased roughly $5.6 million from this year. The change in that position, however, decreased by $6.1 million. The reason for those offsets is effectively you had about $14 million more in accounts payable for one settlement that was accrued at year end, and that increased your accounts payable significantly from last year. That will be paid out in the current fiscal year 2020. Your electric fund, your cash balances went up there as well, going up by roughly $1.3 million to $9.9 million. Your change in that position was almost $4 million. Going on further down, ad valorem taxes, you'll see here they increased by roughly $4.8 million this past year. That was a result purely of the growth in the town. Revaluation will come into play this year. You had a 99.9% overall collection percentage, same as the prior year. You really didn't have anywhere to go up on that one. And you'll see your valuation subject to tax increased by $622 million over fiscal year 2018. Your long-term debt, there was no new debt issuances in 2019. So your general governmental debt decreased by $3 million to $48.5 million. Water and sewer debt decreased by $2.4 million to $51.2 million. And electric fund debt decreased by $516,000 to $2.9 million roughly. The final bullet point is something that we added this year. Of course, the town put into play an OPEB fund at the end of the year to start contributing to that long-term liability. Your net or your total OPEB liability based on the year end increased this year by $4.9 million, and that's the expected future cost of paying for health care benefits for town employees. Any questions on those before I jump forward? A couple of things. This is not a separate document you've got, but we did have two items that we found in this year's audit to bring to your attention. And when we say findings are really classified into three different levels as far as reportable items. You have material weaknesses, which are the most significant. There were none of those. You have a significant deficiency, which is sort of the interim finding. We've got one of those, which is actually in the CAFRA. It's on page 129. And then we have a management letter item, which is a much less significant item that's not likely to cause long-term issues for the town. It's more, typically we put suggestions in there and some other things as well. And that is in a separate letter to the board or to the council. The one item, it was on page 129. Effectively, there were instances where invoices were not recorded in a timely manner, where miscellaneous adjustments were posted in error, or just to reconcile an account until the discrepancy was investigated in greater detail, and accounts that were not fully reconciled. To be very clear, there was no money missing or anything along those lines at all. It was just we had some staff vacancies during the year, some staff turnover, and some software issues that contributed to this as well. And there were some reconciliations that were not either done timely or not done in the manner they had been done in the past because of some of those shortfalls. The other item is the management letter, which is a separate document, and I think you've got that in your packet as well. Excuse my voice. In our test of inventories at June 30th, 2019, we noted several of the items selected for test count verification did not match the inventory values on hand. In addition, it was determined that a journal entry for November to charge out inventory items for specific issues was not posted to the general ledger. The ledger was prepared, it just had not been recorded. Those were the two findings that we had. The final letter that you had from us is what we call the governance letter. Basically, it just tells you there was no problems in performing the audit. There are no new accounting standards that came into play this year. There was a reclassification or change in accounting principle for the effect of the OPEB fund that you put into play at June 28th or 29th of this year. But that's just to restate it and once again go back to that first slide. It changed your terminology somewhat from total net liability to a net liability at year end. But once again, more of a terminology change than anything else. Any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer. Of course, the staff is always available, and you're always welcome to contact me at any time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Joyce. Questions from council? None? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate seeing you again. It's always good when we have a good report. All right, we now move into a time of consent agenda. Consent agenda are items that are typically enacted with a single motion and are generally considered to be non-controversial. If any time a council member wishes to pull one of these items for later discussion, they certainly may do so. I also note, well, actually, I'll save that for later. That's not consent. Any changes to consent, or is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right, there's a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda.
Oh, with the add-on.
One additional item.
I thought the add-on was not consent.
No, yeah, that's under new business.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. So the motion is up for discussion. All right, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. All right, that passes unanimously. Consent. So now we set the agenda for the meeting tonight. I've been informed by the town manager there is an add-on item. There is a piece of paper in front of each of you. And the proposal here is that one be a new business item Let me turn the page here. And I believe since we have none scheduled, we can make this one number 1 without objection. Are there any other changes to the agenda?
Yes, I'd like to add one also under, under unfinished business.
What's the topic?
Just general comments.
Unfinished business, general comments? All right. Do any council members have any questions or clarification on that? All right, not hearing any. I've made a note, and if there's no other comments, then I'll take a motion.
Motion approved with the add-on and the 2 add-ons.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. All right, that passes unanimously. And as the clerk is picking up the sign-up sheets, I'll remind you, this is the public forum time. This is the time where we listen to you, and I will call the names on here as we go through them. Each speaker has 3 minutes, 1 person per address. If you're here to speak on behalf of a large group, then if you've indicated so, I'll give you the opportunity to say that. We have a timer up here that has a 3-minute timer, and it's got green light, yellow light, red light. So as you see those lights changing, moving towards red, feel free to start wrapping it up. Thank you. We have 2 people on the public forum sign-in, and I'll call them in order. Joseph Malfio. As you come up, please start by stating your name and your address, and then you may begin.
Joseph Malfeo, 2642 Marazi Trail. This is a continuation of November 6th meeting. The last piece of the puzzle is the funding of the project. On August 30th, 2019, 13 and a half years later after the purchase of the property, 11 and a half years after it was rezoned, permitted for government use, 5 years after documentation indicated confirmation of capital improvement plans, the town council approves and releases funding for the plan that was devised by the town council, approved for construction by the town council, and subsequently approved for funding by the town council. On October 16th, 2019, I received my first correspondence ever in the form of an email from the HOA Association of Magan Management, indicating the town of Apex has commenced construction of a major capital improvement project, and the project is set to be the main electrical operations center for the entire town, and that there will be an emergency meeting held in less than 24 hours on October 17th at the Parkside Pool to discuss the specifics of the project. I finally got it, what I've been waiting years for, the notice, which arrived 3 days after clear cutting began in what feels like an under the cover of night operation. In the words of our political forefathers, that government should be of the people, by the people, and for the people, the town of Apex in this circumstance acted as if there was no people at all. And that's not okay. The town's approach with regard to the operations plant contradicts this message of transparency as described at apex.org, apexnc.org. What grade would the John Locke Foundation give you now if they evaluated this body of work? Mr. Mayor, Town Councilman, the residents are requesting the project be stopped immediately and the scope of the project be changed. Alternative municipal solutions should be discussed openly. You can't just ignore the major stakeholders of a project like this. The people want the property to be utilized for Apex's growth, and surely there are other expansionary needs that we can agree on. Perhaps a tastefully done office complex, a campus, a new park, or even a further electrical structure can be considered. Or perhaps the 22 acres the town owns 1 mile south of this property can be considered for the electrical operations plant. Either way, one thing is for certain, we're vehemently opposed against a cell tower, any plans of a cell tower, or dropping a commercial vehicle truck installation and maintenance facility in our populated neighborhood with an exceptionally high number of children in it. It's not safe, it doesn't make sense, and it's borderline irresponsible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malfeo. And Ann Nyland.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Ann Nyland. I reside at 1892 Blue Jay Point in Apex. Councilman, Mayor, and staff, we have made numerous attempts to secure documents relating to the relocation of the Apex Electric Operations Center to the Bella Casa Buckhorn neighborhoods. We remind you that under the Freedom of Information Act, we are entitled to receive all information from the town regarding this project. We received part of our request on November 4th, 2019, and we were told that we would receive the balance of the documents after the November 6th, 2019 council meeting. To date, we have not received any additional documents. We have gone to town hall. We have sent numerous emails, only to receive the sound of crickets in the night. We are requesting again that all documents, including emails, be provided to us immediately. There must be transparency from the town regarding this project. We want to reiterate that the placement of this facility in any residential neighborhood is not acceptable. Initially, the land was bought for the purpose of a substation, not an operations center. Over time, the dynamics of the area have changed significantly. Residential communities now surround the property that were approved by the town council and the planning board of Apex. We find it reprehensible that the town of Apex found this residentially zoned area suitable for an electrical warehouse and truck terminal under the guise of an office. We find it reprehensible that the town approved this facility in an area where they will be putting children at risk due to increased traffic flow and no major road access for trucks. Again, we request that the town look for an industrial zoned area for this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nyland. That concludes public forum. Before we move on to the next thing, I just want to, for the town manager, you're familiar with the FOIA request that's been made? Has there been?
I will follow up
with the clerk?
Town clerk.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay. Okay, that was for their benefit. Now we'll move into public hearings. Public hearing number 1 is Sarah Rayfield is presenting rezoning case 19CZ02, the Morris Acres PUD. And this sounds familiar. I think we've heard about this before, a little bit.
Heard about it, got some starter information, but we'll be giving the full presentation this evening.
All right.
Right. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. I will be presenting rezoning case 19CZ02, Morris Acres PUD. The site is located at 0728 and 7208B Morris Acres Road. Switch these. I'm not going to grow. All right. The property is owned by Edith Morris. The applicant is Kaplan Residential and is being presented by Jason Barron of Morningstar Law Group. Just to familiarize you with the general location of the site, we are looking here in this area east of 540 and north of 64. Give you a little more contextual setting. The site sits northeast of Morris Acres Road, south of Jenks Road, west of 55, and northwest here of Vision Drive. The first 3 roads are all thoroughfares. Vision Drive is a east-west collector between those thoroughfares. This site is 17.44 acres, and as you'll see here, it is situated between large commercial nodes over in this area, as well as a mix of residential housing types and densities. And we'll just zoom in a little bit closer and give you an aerial of the site and the existing structures. There are several existing structures here on the site. The applicant held a neighborhood meeting on October 29th. The full packet is included in your staff report. The existing zoning for the site is rural residential. The proposed zoning is PUD, conditional zoning. The 2045 land use map identifies the property subject to this rezoning as medium-density residential. The rezoning to planned unit development conditional zoning as proposed is consistent with the medium-density residential classification. And here is an inset from the adopted Advanced Apex context areas. If y'all will recall, the context areas are meant to encompass things like land use, modal priorities, and facility design elements. TOD areas, this was the transit-oriented development here in blue. The brown is the suburban context. TOD areas are characterized by residential or non-residential community activity centers centered around a transit corridor that may include future transit services. A portion of this site, again, so we're looking here, the site sits in this area. A portion of this site was identified and adopted within the TOD context area with Advanced Apex. The location is appropriate for higher medium density uses like townhomes due to the proximity to 540, the adjacent flats at 540 multifamily development, and the Beaver Creek at 540 townhome development, as well as proximity to a future transit corridor. TOD development typically dictates transit supportive densities, which is a minimum of 7 units per acre for a circulator service. So the Morris Acres pod proposes a maximum density of 7 units per acre, which we'll get to, but just wanted to let you know that this contributes to an overall density that is transit supportive. And then these are the engineered existing conditions corresponding with the aerial that we saw previously. And this is the proposed site. I'm going to go over everything included in the proposed conditions and uses. So we'll leave this one up as I go through that. The permitted uses proposed are townhomes, greenway, recreation facility private, park active or passive, and utility minor. Maximum residential density for the project, as I mentioned, is 7 dwelling units per acre with no more than 122 total units. Maximum height is 3 stories, building height of 45 feet. Building setbacks are standard. Built upon area is a maximum of 70%. Parking would be provided per standards in the UDO. The RCA proposed, the Resource Conservation Area proposed, is providing at least 20%, which is 3.49 acres, and that is the minimum requirement with the PUD. The buffers, going to go over what is required as well as what is proposed. The proposed buffers are based off of the townhome use. So the western border here, required buffer would be a 10-foot type B, proposed is a 30-foot type A. To the north would be 10-foot, most part of it 10-foot type B. They are proposing a 20-foot type A. Along here to the south, along Morris Acres Road, would be required a 30-foot type B, and they are providing a 30-foot type A. And along the eastern boundary of the property, required would be a 20-foot type B, proposed is a 50-foot type A. This is also one of their zoning conditions. Just wanted to point out that all of the buffers proposed either exceed the buffer requirements either by width and or opacity. Connectivity to the site, there will be a 10-foot wide multi-use path, side path along Morris Acres Road. Primary point of access, full movement point of access will line up here. Secondary access over here, and a stub street for future connection up here in this area. The proposed pod is consistent with the Apex Transportation Plan. The site will promote connectivity to the undeveloped property north of the site. A traffic study was performed with the pod rezoning application. There were no off-site improvements recommended for this development. Parks and Recreation Cultural Resource Advisory Commission held a meeting May 29th, and fee in lieu was recommended at that time and would be determined at the time of master subdivision plan approval. Additionally, wayfinding measures at the site shall also be provided in an effort to facilitate the movement of vehicles and pedestrians to and within the development. The site proposes to extend utilities to the site. The applicant has also proposed additional stormwater measures. The full language is in your report. Essentially, they will be providing stormwater controls as permitted by DOT and the town of Apex for the 1-year, 10-year, 25-year, and 10-year storm events. Again, the detailed language is in your staff report. These are the proposed elevations. We did receive our typical architectural standards with these zoning conditions. Those 10 are in your staff report. They are consistent with what we typically see with a townhome product. Additionally, the following zoning conditions have been proposed. That is a maximum of 122 residential units, a 50-foot type A buffer established and maintained along the eastern boundary of the subject property. The maximum height set at 3 stories or 45 feet. All buildings constructed on the property shall provide solar conduit for the installation of rooftop solar panels, and the applicant shall provide a 6 by 6 foot public art easement to the town of Apex along Morris Acres Road. Planning staff recommends approval of rezoning 19 CZ02 Morris Acres PUD with the conditions as offered by the applicant. The planning board recommended approval of this rezoning at their November 12th meeting. That report is included in your packet. Approval of the rezoning is reasonable because the proposed plan unit development conditional zoning district is consistent with the medium-density residential land use classification on the 2045 land use map. The proposed rezoning is also reasonable and in the public interest because it provides an adequate transition in the height and density from the existing multifamily and townhome uses to the south and the existing single-family residential development to the east. The proposed rezoning allows for a maximum of 7 dwelling units per acres, which is the minimum density needed to support the transit-oriented development context area as adopted with Advance Apex. I will be happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
All right, questions?
You didn't mention the dollar amount for the Parks and Rec fee. Is that because there's a potential to be single-family and townhouse units, or?
So that fee will be determined at the time the master subdivision plan is approved. Because this is only the PUD, that rate may change between.
Depending on the number of units they end up putting in?
As I understand it, that fee is determined, or rather is set when the subdivision is approved. So when the master subdivision plan were to come through, since that hasn't been submitted or anything at this point in time. So it would be depending on what that rate is when the subdivision plan is approved.
Okay.
Then it's set. No.
Now, the actual amount is set at PUD, but we don't know how many units. So we don't have the total amount.
Okay,
It's the current amount that's published in the fee schedule.
okay, all right. This stormwater mitigation, what was the determination of that? Because I know there's a lot of concern in that area with stormwater and the flow in the old neighborhood from the 90s and how it was developed. I mean, what was the details of the plan?
So essentially, it's there will be no. This site will capture all of the stormwater from this development as required currently by UDO, and in fact will make a slight improvement to the stormwater in the area. We do also have Stan, our stormwater engineer, here if you have specific questions.
Yeah, I guess I do want to talk about that a little bit more, so,
Okay.
yeah, maybe it's best suited for him.
Want Stan up here?
Hi, Stan Fortier. I'm a senior engineer with the Water Resources Department.
Fantastic, thanks for coming. So for this basin here, is this like the single drainage point, like for this landmass, for this area?
Generally, yes. The neighborhood is really bounded by 55 and Jenks, and it all kind of funnels to the culverts that go under Morris Acres Drive.
So obviously this parcel is making stormwater mitigation for that parcel, but I think there's an empty parcel to the north that whenever that develops will also drain down through this, correct?
It likely would.
Yeah.
Obviously, the developer would be responsible for mitigating what they're proposing now. If in the future that additional property were to develop, then that developer would also have to mitigate it also.
I'm just trying to think of like downstream, right? So would it make sense, and you know this better than anybody, would it make sense to, I know they've talked about increasing the culvert size or number of culverts in this area where it kind of drains through. Would it make sense to kind of set a fee aside for that culvert improvement when the property to the north develops, so that way they can all be kind of mitigated at that time?
There's a lot of different ways to do things. Typically, we handle it or at least look at it on a project by project basis. We don't know what's going to happen. Certainly in the design phase, the engineer, oftentimes in projects that are phased, if it all drains to one spot and it all can get there, sometimes they design for that, make provisions to make a modification to an existing pond to make it larger, stub drainage all the way so that it's easier to accept runoff from the next phase. Right now, I haven't actually even seen anything other than what they're proposing, and what they've agreed to is that they're going to evaluate the site. They're going to provide detention up to the 25-year storm, and if there's impacts to the 100-year storm event, they're going to make provisions to make their pond accept the 100-year storm flow. So they may make it slightly better based on the documents that they sent us, but they're not going to make it worse. There is a significant flooding problem. The whole basin drains to one spot, and there are some houses that are in the proximity of that low spot. The storm drainage systems are typically designed for a 10-year storm. When we get these excessive rain events, the pipes typically don't handle it. The roadway is a DOT-owned and maintained road. The town does not maintain it. Any improvements that would be possibly proposed would have to get approval by the DOT. Certainly, we did do some investigating of possible solutions on how to get more water under the road, but we really didn't look at any specific design. We did not look downstream. Certainly, allowing more water through could be detrimental to the downstream properties. And we didn't look at any of that at this point. It was more, what would it take to lower the flood in that area that's being impacted? But we didn't really, we haven't approached DOT about the possibility of even doing it. Some estimates that we put together were super rough since we really haven't, done anything other than just real preliminary work at looking at that.
Anything else?
No, that's good. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
I guess I'd like to conclude that maybe just by saying that through the process, as staff and everybody looks at this, think in the future, because we're dealing with this right in the neighborhood that I live in too, that the way the development process worked in developing houses in floodplains and all that stuff and property lines and not adequate space, as is evident here, right? With some of those properties flooding, think about what is to come to the north of this and what's going to drain down this way, and maybe instead of making improvements that are going to benefit, instead of having them do this and then coming back in 5-10 years and tearing it all out, and maybe we hold something off to the side. I don't know the right answer to that, but
Well, certainly over the years, the town had minimal stormwater controls and buffers in place. As development increased, we added, stream buffers and riparian buffers and keeping floodplain off of properties, and a lot of things that have helped a lot of the newer development. Unfortunately, there's a lot of neighborhoods that were built, 15 years ago or longer that those weren't in place, they're not required, and as general town development increased, we've added those, and we've kind of found that a lot of the developments that are happening now, we're not experiencing some of the same flooding problems that some of the existing neighborhoods are having. So I think what we've done has probably been very helpful, but it's hard to go back and add ponds when there's no room because the houses are on all the land. But
All right, thank you, Stan.
okay.
I had a follow-up. The PUD references a 48-inch or some kind of culvert that they may try to tie into pending approval. So I guess I have a couple questions about that. One is, so right now there are two culverts, and there's a main one and then one that's used. Do both culverts move water right now, or is it just the one nearer to?
Yes, they both do.
Okay.
There's an existing 6-foot by 8-foot culvert that basically handled all the storm flow. My understanding is that when DOT built 540, the section of Morris Acres used to be Green Level Church, and the configuration kind of changed. They kind of cut Green Level Church off, built or realigned the current section of Morris Acres. When they did that, they added curb and gutter and storm drain improvements to that section of road and installed a new 48-inch culvert under the road to carry some of the storm flow, but also to capture all of their road drainage. The engineer has examined what they're proposing, and they've kind of come to the conclusion that if they are allowed to capture it in their pond for a 25-year storm, pipe it directly into the street drainage, use that culvert that goes under and out, that they could make a reduction in the 100-year flood elevation by a few tenths. But they would have to get DOT's approval to do that, and I'm not really sure exactly how much flow we're talking about, how much extra capacity that road system has, if it could handle the 25-year storm. There's certain things that they still have to calculate, but that's what they're trying. At least their preliminary effort is that if they can do that, it may make a slight decrease in some of the flooding in that area.
And is 48, do you guys have rough numbers as far as 48-inch culvert can handle X number of houses or townhouses? Is there like a ratio we can use?
I'm not really aware of one. Obviously, it's the size of the pipe and the slope of the pipe can carry X amount, but it's not really related. Sewer is easy. We kind of know how much sewer each house generates. Stormwater runoff is a lot of conditions, the amount of grass, landscaping, rooftops, driveways, all the impervious surfaces add to it. So, I mean, we could come up with some rough numbers, but as it stands now, both the existing pipe and the 48-inch RCP are carrying stormwater currently, and, for the larger storms, they don't quite. They do enough that the road isn't overtopped, and a lot of what DOT designs for in this area, typically, it's a 25-year storm that they design for, so that the road doesn't get overtopped. It seems to have worked in some of the larger storms that we have. We didn't have record that the road was overtopped. But the culverts are pretty low, and the embankment is pretty high, and I think in the last storm event that we had, I think 6 to 7 feet of stormwater accumulated there, and obviously that backs up a long way and goes onto properties. Our preliminary design was that it would be a culvert extremely larger than what's there in order to carry all that and limit the flood water as low as we can keep it.
And it mentioned DOT approval for using that existing culvert. Can you explain how that process would work, roughly?
My understanding, it's similar to when the developer comes in, they need to get our approval, but they also have to get driveway permits and encroachment agreements with DOT to do improvements in the road. In this particular case, there may be road widening, utility installations, but also stormwater falls in that same realm. So it would be probably through an encroachment agreement or a three-party agreement with the DOT. They would look at the capacity of their pipes. If their pipes have lots of capacity and they can handle all what the developer wants to add to them, then they would, in all likelihood, approve it. If there was a problem and they felt that it was going to overload their system, obviously, first comes first is that they want their road to drain properly. And if the developer is filling up the pipe and the road can't drain, then DOT is probably not going to like that. So I think that the provision that they were making is if the final design cannot be approved by DOT as far as accepting their stormwater, they're going to make a larger pond on site to contain the 100-year storm and then discharge that into the stream. But it should keep the level of the flood waters what they are currently, which is what the UDO requires.
So in the interest of not bogging down too much in stormwater, is there anything else?
That's all I have.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Stan.
Okay.
And just the last call to see if anybody had anything else for Ms. Rayfield or related to, and I think, don't you normally state whether or not staff approves and also planning board?
I did, I think.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's okay.
I wanted to be clear, though. I may have missed it.
So planning staff recommends approval.
Okay.
Because it is consistent with the land use map, and we find that the rezoning request is reasonable and in the public best interest. And planning board did recommend approval at their November 12th meeting.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
If there's nothing else from council. All right, at this time I'll ask if the applicant or representative wishes to come forward.
Maybe.
How are you doing, sir?
Good. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Jason Barron with Morningstar Law Group here on behalf of the owners as well as the applicant, in this case, Kaplan Residential. The room looks a lot different tonight than it did the last time we were here. And we were serious when we said publicly that we wanted the opportunity to continue working with the neighborhood to try to make this something that would fit and that would meet with the court of public opinion as well as the opinion of the boards and council that is involved in this process. And I'm pleased that the room does look a lot different tonight. As we had our neighborhood meeting, we reconvened a neighborhood meeting that included everybody within 300 feet. And when we proposed this updated concept to them, the reception was a lot different, and I wasn't sure what we would get. And so I want to applaud the community's involvement in this process. Their voices spoke loudly and very clearly in a way that meant a lot to us, and Kaplan certainly heard it and went back and made some pretty serious changes to an application in a fairly short period of time. With that said, the case is now a 122-unit townhome development. It was a 297 apartment community, which was up to 5 stories with some transition areas, some additional open space that was being provided, which was afforded by the opportunity to do taller. But the voices of the community have been clear that 5-story apartment rentals in that area were not in favor, and so that is the change that has been made. My client still believes in this site in terms of appropriate densities. As was mentioned by Sarah during the presentation, it is along a town anticipated transit corridor, and so 7 units to the acre makes sense from a transit concept. It's also got great proximity to services. I brought up Google Maps just before I hopped up here to see what the walk and the drive is to the front of Beaver Creek. I actually put Coles in. And so it's a 2-minute drive and a 12-minute walk if you're inclined to walk from the site over to Beaver Creek. So in addition to there being planned transit in this area, it is a site that lends itself nicely to density of an appropriate amount. And it's got the flyover of 64. You actually don't have to get out onto 64. You don't have to get onto 55 in order to get to Beaver Creek from this site. So again, it's a site that, from a density standpoint, really makes sense for this type of development. One of the things that hasn't changed as part of our plan for this development, whether it was at the previous proposal or where we are tonight, is the commitment to stormwater. We spent several months during the zoning process. We filed this case in February, so we've been at it for a while. We spent several months during the zoning process really studying the stormwater issue that we first became aware of at our very initial neighborhood meeting. I mean, we heard from a number of folks, especially the folks who are on Flint's Pond Circle, with respect to flooding situations that exist before we started the process. And I've told people, and I tell people at every neighborhood meeting that we have, one of the real functional values of neighborhood meetings is to receive feedback like that, because you just don't know. You can look at land use plans and you can walk property, but until you've lived it, you don't know the unique kind of nuances of each individual site. And it became clear during this process that there was an existing flooding problem. And so we kind of put the project on hold, and we spent the better part of 2 months conducting a flood study, much earlier than you would in the process. My client spent the resources to fully understand what were the problems, to ascertain where the floodplain exists as of today, and it exists in people's backyards. Some of those were platted into the floodplain, but be that as it may, we confirmed those locations and spent a lot of time trying to figure out what we could do in order to try to address a situation that, as we began to understand it better, it became clear this is a situation that is far beyond any individual development. As I understand it, the overall drainage basin for this particular point of drainage is in excess of 260 acres, and we occupy just 17 acres of that area. And so there's little that you can do with 17 acres to meaningfully change the situation for the other 260 acres of drainage that is going through that single point. But my client, at a minimum, wanted to make sure that whatever they did, they weren't going to make the situation worse. They might not be able to make it meaningfully better, and they are incredibly sympathetic to the plight. I lived behind an area that suffered from drainage problems for 12 years. I understand that well. And so we wanted to make sure, my client wanted to make sure that whatever they did on the site would not cause additional harm. And so the conditions that are before you all tonight with respect to stormwater are an alternative scenario. Under scenario A, we are piping stormwater directly to the culvert that was talked about, and it essentially bypasses the drainage area that exists along our eastern boundary. And so under a standard situation, the stormwater will accumulate in a BMP in this location, and then it will be released slowly into the existing kind of natural drainage feature. What our proposal is to do is to take that stormwater and pipe it directly through our site and into that existing culvert under Morris Acres Road. As we studied that, if we include the 25-year storm and the direct piping, which is not an insignificant expense, and we've made it subject to DOT's approval because they get to approve it, we're able to reduce the floodplain or flood level by 0.2 of a foot. Again, not a ton, but it's not making the situation any worse. Our alternative is, if DOT doesn't approve that, then the condition goes on to say that we will engineer for the 2, 10, 25, and 100-year storm. And so we will go ahead and install the 100-year storm as part of this development in the event that DOT doesn't allow us to directly pipe to the culvert. Again, that is a commitment that was part of the prior case that was very important to my client, and that remains a commitment of the case today. I do want to point out that I don't think I've worked on a townhome development adjacent to single family that included a 50-foot type A buffer. It's a large buffer, and I appreciate that there are folks along there who would like to see it larger. My client would like to see it larger. The original plan for this proposal, this property, had this designated as permanent open space. I mean, when it was planned as an apartment community, my client wanted to be able to provide that as a transition area where nothing would happen. Unfortunately, when the site drops, it expands, and we need more footprint, but they still want to be context sensitive, and they're installing a 50-foot type A buffer. I know folks want to see that closer to 100. We just don't have enough land area. You can see the existing riparian areas that we can't do anything with. It's already pretty small, and so in order to achieve a density for a development that makes sense here, we really can't give, from a buffer standpoint, much more than we already have in that area. Lastly, I do want to note that there's discussion associated with changing significantly how stormwater flows under Morris Acres Road. I mean, that's a conversation we've been involved in for an extended period of time. It's a significant expense. And again, it's beyond this project. I mean, from what I understand, it's in excess of $500,000 is what it would cost to be able to do that. And that's just not something a 17-acre townhome project can afford. But I think we're willing to, be involved in the conversation as we move forward, assuming we're successful tonight. We're willing to be involved in the conversation at the master subdivision level to talk about what are the creative solutions that exist in order to address that significant stormwater problem that remains. Lastly, I'll note that as staff mentioned, we do have a recommendation of approval from the planning staff. We also have a unanimous recommendation of approval from the planning board. I think the last time we were here, it was a 5-2 vote, and this was a unanimous recommendation of approval. And so with that, we're excited to be here, excited for hopefully the culmination of what has been a very adventurous and interesting zoning case to work on. We are pleased that it appears, it feels like the vast majority of the community who's been actively involved in this process has gotten out of this process what they wanted, or at least the lack of a gazillion red shirts behind me tells me that. But with that, we're here to answer any questions that you all may have, and we respectfully request you all support and approval of the case.
All right, thank you, Mr. Barron. And if it's all right with the council, I'd like to hold the questions for Mr. Barron until after the public hearing. We'll have him available for that. Is that all right? Okay. All right, we'll go to the public hearing. There's one person who has signed up to speak, Ryan Simmons. And Mr. Simmons, you marked that you're here speaking for 4 or more people who are present.
I am, but I probably don't need 9 minutes.
All right. Just to follow the process, can you identify by raising your hands if he is speaking for you? All right. Thank you, Mr. Simmons.
Ryan Simmons, 2508 Flint's Pond, and appreciate all your time. I know it's been a sort of a long 10 months. It's been long for us too. And thank you, Jason and Kaplan, for working with us to date. I'm glad we're here where we are now, and obviously this is an effective forum, so thank you. So as a community, we're comfortable with the medium density. 122 townhomes falls in line with sort of what we envisioned. Makes a more conducive neighborhood, since this really will be part of our neighborhood once it's fully developed. But there's a few things that we wanted to sort of hone in on their actual proposal. And so those are increasing the buffers, rerouting the sanitary lines, rerouting the proposed storm lines, and then the Morris Acres road improvements, which Stan and others have talked about. So like Jason mentioned, we'll go to the northeast corner of the site. There's about 6 or 7 houses that are pretty much right on the property line, and this is where they are proposing the 50-foot setback. So what we were in discussions with was increasing that to a 100-foot buffer, just to give this development some little bit of breathing room for both the townhomes and the existing homes. So we were thinking either a 100-foot buffer, or if it's not that, having a building-to-building setback of 110 feet to 150 feet, which would fall in line with the existing development within our neighborhood. This is the Walden Creek townhomes. Right now, their setbacks throughout between Walden Creek subdivision and their townhomes, they've got a minimum of 50 feet setback, and then a building-to-building 150-foot setback. So given that this whole swath between Jinx, Morris Acres, and 55 is really going to become one neighborhood once it's all said and done with the overall development, we just would like to see some consistency from one side of the development all the way to the new development. The other item is moving their sanitary line. So right now, this is in the southeast corner of the development. They've proposed going across this stream where we've had the significant flooding, and basically they'll have to clear cut the existing vegetation to connect to an existing manhole here. So it appears there are a few existing sanitary lines on the other side of Morris Acres, and so we're requesting that they move to the other side. And so some of the photos, you can see how you have this existing mature vegetation, which is actually helping to absorb some of the water within the flooding issue. So that would be our second request. And you all are familiar with a lot of these photos. A lot of these don't do justice. Some of these are my yard, and it got a lot worse than this. And it is an existing problem. Stan's even spoke about it. We know there's issues, and our concern is with the new development, it's just going to increase. So we spoke about it before, the future development to the north, and then this proposed Morris Acres development coming down here in the south. So right now, we've got our entire subdivision and these new potential developments all going into these two existing culverts that are just undersized. So we're going from pervious to impervious sites. Regardless of retention ponds, they're all going to eventually flow into this stream and cause issues in these larger storm events. So right now, Brett, you had spoke about the two culverts. The one on the right is the 48-inch, and then the other existing one is closer to the 6x8 that Stan had mentioned. So, and this is a clarification I would like to get from Stan. So they're saying that it's going to reduce the runoff by a fraction of an inch, but is that only up to a 25-year storm? That would be a question for you. If that's the case, that doesn't really mean anything to the people's homes that are getting flooded, because in normal conditions, there are no flooding issues, but 4 to 5 times or even more, there's a 100-year flood that is causing several feet of water in several homes and backyards. And then as late as August, we got the 1,000-year flood, which is 7 to 8 feet in my backyard. So, you know, I know Jason and his team are doing the right thing by not adding to the regular storm events, but we have the condition where anything greater than a 100-year storm is going to ultimately flood the same area if nothing's done about the culverts. The other item was draining directly into the 48-inch culvert. I know there's some time lapse when the retention ponds are actually draining, but my concern would be you're taking this 48-inch out of commission just for this development that's not even built yet. So if you take that out, what does it do to the existing flooding right now? And then the last thing was, if DOT does not give them permission to go through the 48-inch, they're ultimately building a bigger 100-year flood retention pond, but then that's going to drain in the same area, the north side of Morris Acres, and just create more issues. So if we get back-to-back storms or multiple 100-year storms, it's ultimately going to flood the same area that we're having problems with. So we would just ask that they construct a new culvert going under Morris Acres and not even deal with the existing culverts that are not adequate right now. That, or like Stan mentioned, actually upgrading the existing culverts to something bigger. And this was something that the town staff had looked at pretty extensively, just for flows and stuff like that. But the first option was doing a bridge, which would ultimately have the stream free flow and reduce water levels by potentially 3 feet or more, which is significant when we're talking about 7 or 8 feet in people's backyards. And then the more economical solution would be 3 new culverts going under 3 box culverts, as you can see in the top right. So this has the same impact, maybe a little bit less efficient, but it would allow the water to free flow. And this could also help accommodate the future development to the north. So this seems to help solve a lot of the problems going on. And just want to leave you with some photos before I evacuated my house. Yeah, so I mean, the water level got even higher than this, and it was ridiculous. I had 3 feet of water, you know, within my crawl space and home. And I don't know if the development doesn't do anything. I like desperately need your help. I mean, our neighbors need your help to actually solve this, because this is ridiculous. I mean, I've got kids, I've got animals, and the last thing I would want is someone getting hurt, and, you know, let alone property damage, which is pretty extensive. So I appreciate your time. Just let me know if you have questions, or if Stan or anyone has questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Simmons.
Thank you.
All right, and that's the last person, so I'll close the public hearing. And just to see if If council had any curiosities based on that presentation they want to inquire of staff, they're welcome to do so. But at this time, I'll close the public hearing, refer the matter to council for discussion.
May I ask Stan a question?
Yes,
Still.
sure.
Where does this water go after it goes under Morris Acres? And is there going to be backup?
That closely, but it goes across through the townhome neighborhood. It goes under a stub road, sort of as that flyover comes around and it makes a turn and there's a stub street, the water goes under there, and then it goes under a culvert under 64. But we haven't really looked at how big that culvert is, how much capacity it has. That would obviously be the next step if we were going to proceed further to calculate all that. I know 64 is probably 20 plus feet, maybe 30 feet higher than the low ground of where that culvert is. And most of the development on that side is pretty significantly high over there, so I don't think it would impact. But I don't know what it will do further downstream. You put a tremendous head on that water and it would really come flying out of that pipe. And there are other things downstream of 64. So we don't really know what all the impacts would be.
Don't we analyze these things to the 10% point or something like that? Or
We do.
If you don't mind, if you want to keep answering questions, can you come up to the mic? I thought that was going to be a short answer, but I don't want people to miss out.
As part of the stormwater impact statement that is typically submitted with the subdivision plan, they have to look at the 10% point and what kind of impacts they're going to have downstream in all of those things. Typically, it's still based on the certain design storms that we're going after, and anything that's above really the 10-year storm event is really over and above what's actually required in the UDO. There are certain parts of town that now have more stringent requirements, but this actual section is not included in that. But when they get to the point where they have their site plan and they want to submit that, they would also include a stormwater impact statement identifying potential conflicts, problems, and what they're going to do to minimize those. And certainly, usually what happens is it's additional on-site stormwater controls, like larger ponds to hold back more water to lessen the impacts that there would be on properties downstream.
if they commit to a 25-year storm, then do they have to analyze all the way downstream for a 25-year storm?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously, we would need to look at all of their calculations and see what kind of impacts that would be. They did do the flood study from upstream to the Morris Acres culvert and what kind of impacts that had for the 25 and 100-year storm events. And that's kind of where they've kind of figured out that if they kind of rerouted some of the water and it might make a slight decrease in the water level. So certainly those are all things that we would be concerned with. And typically, because Morris Acres and the culverts that are there are kind of the constriction point, they probably aren't going to make the conditions worse downstream because the water can't get downstream. Unless...
Which means it backs up upstream.
Potentially, but they would also have then to size their ponds accordingly to prevent that from happening. That in theory, that's what they're targeting to go after or to accomplish.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I have a couple more questions, but I will defer to anybody that wants to right now.
Go ahead.
I guess one of the questions I have is for Mr. Barron's. Do you know what the difference in price of a 25-year storm pond and a 100-year storm pond is for this property?
That's definitely not a question for Mr. Barron. You're more qualified than I am to answer that question. I can promise you that.
Peter Canasson, Jones Canasson Engineering. We did a flood study for this project to evaluate the existing culverts that go under Morris Acres Road. As far as cost, frankly, I wouldn't even want to gauge it. Never designed one to 100-year. We've gone to 25, but never to 100-year. That's a significant change and condition to this type of proposal and zoning request. So I don't want to put a number since, like I said, it's very, it would be not a typical design for sure.
In your design, have you allowed area for the 100-year storm pond?
If we're designing to the 100-year, yeah, that pond will be sized for the capacity to handle the 100-year storm to release that.
I guess my question is, if you design to a 25-year storm and the pond, and then they run into problems downstream, I guess, well, maybe that analysis will be done first. But is there room to allow for the 100-year storm pond, the 100-year retention pond?
Well, we're looking at two things. Our first approach is, like has been said, to try to tie to the 48-inch pipe. That's conditioned upon approval by NCDOT. I do want to point out, we're not taking the 48-inch pipe out of commission. We're proposing to build a junction box over the pipe, so it'll still receive water from the stream flow during a flooding situation. We're just doing a direct connection. Under that scenario, the flood study that we've run shows that the 100-year storm can be reduced by 0.2 of a foot. Again, that's marginal, but at least the charge that we feel per the UDO that we as a project are required to hold to is to not increase any of the flooding. We're showing that we're reducing it 0.2. We're saying the second part of that is that if DOT does not allow us through the encroachment agreement process, that we will design the storm to the 100-year storm. So, I mean, that's an analysis that will happen at the time
That
of.
will take place. You might lose a house or two in that situation or something.
I mean, you could. I mean, it's going to be a substantial increase in size from your typical 10-year storm or 25-year storm. It's going to be significant.
Do you know where that pond would be on this site?
I expect it to be somewhere in this area, you know, along the existing stream buffer in the town buffer. And just to give you an idea, I didn't walk the whole stream all the way down to 64, but you can access it from Beaver Commons by that little side road that kind of connects. If I'm in the right location, it's triple box culverts underneath 64, about 7 by 6. So I don't know what the length of stream is between Morris Acres and 64. If I was to take a guess, I might say it's a half a mile. That's just a pure guess, but that's a significant difference in capacity to handle flow of water from what you see at Morris Acres Road.
So Highway 64 is safe, is what you're telling us.
Most likely, yes.
We heard a proposal earlier about the sanitary sewer and a proposed change to go instead of east to the south, I believe. Thoughts on that?
Well, there are manholes on the opposite side of Morris Acres Road. The one thing I do not know is whether they're accessible by existing easements. The other condition that poses is that if we have to go underneath Morris Acres Road by bore and jack, that's a significant increase. It's something that we can certainly explore. We did not do that during this rezoning process, but certainly if this moves forward to a preliminary subdivision, we would certainly do it at that time. If it's possible to do and it's cost effective, I see no reason why we wouldn't be able to do that. We have to look at elevations too and make sure those manholes are deep enough in order to access. So those are things that are going to have to be done, like I said, during that preliminary subdivision process.
Yeah, and Councilwoman Killingsworth, if I could just dovetail on that point. That was a comment that we received for the first time, and no fault to anybody, but it was a comment we received for the first time about 2 weeks ago. And we just haven't been able to do the engineering necessary, and really won't be able to until we get to master subdivision, to answer the questions that Peter touched on with respect to, what is the height of it? Is it something that can be achieved within our development plan? So if it were something that we had the opportunity to knock out and make that commitment, I feel confident my client would have done that by now. We just there hasn't been enough time.
All right, and then as far as setback, so currently your building setback is from the buffer 10 feet from the buildings. So basically we're looking at, especially on the northeast side, 60 foot from the back of their property line to the first building starting.
That's right.
So can you propose any increase in that buffer there to give them a little more leeway on the backside of their property?
I can ask my client that question. The code requirement is 10 feet off. The backyard will be larger than 10 feet. Not sure what that's going to be. Probably 15 to 20 feet is what would be typical for a townhome backyard. And so there will be some additional building separation just wired into the fact that you've got a townhome lot with a rear yard. Just don't know what that is. But I'll talk with my client here in a moment.
Mr. Barron, if I could tag on to that, I just, related to the presentation by the neighborhood, since you're going to go and check with your client, could you see if there are any of the other things that were mentioned tonight, especially if there are things that you've already heard about previously? Okay. You can ask them about any of those suggestions that they mentioned this evening.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you know how long the Morse family has owned this property? And if the road is named after the family, do you know any history on the property?
They've owned it for a while. They actually owned, I believe their extended family owned all of what is now developed as Walden Creek. And their family owns the parcel to the north of this. I don't know the answer in terms of how long it's been in the family, but I understand it's been in the family for a long time. And it's called Morris Acres, I believe, because of, it was, the name was changed when they cut it off. So.
I have one final question, and it applies really not just to this subdivision development, but to all others. And Ms. Rayfield said that it's in the best public interest. I'm part of the public. Can you tell me how it's in my best interest? How is this development in my best interest?
Well, as I mentioned during my presentation, we believe it's an appropriate site for density. It's got great access to 64. It's got great access to services. It's walkable. It's located on a planned transit line. It's kind of where, from a planning standpoint, when you put your planner's cap on, it's where you want to put people. Because when you suppress density in location like this, you have to find somewhere else for it, because the idea is you're a growing community and folks are coming. And so when you suppress density in places where you have existing infrastructure to support it, where you have services within short drives rather than long drives, what you end up doing is forcing it to other parts of the community that aren't as ideally located with respect to those critical things. So we believe that from an overall standpoint, given its location, the fact that it abuts 540, it's tucked in. There are apartments across the street. There are townhomes across the street. It's a good transitional use. It's got the right transitions wired into the development plan itself. It's providing a stormwater benefit. Again, maybe not a stormwater fix, but certainly a stormwater benefit as compared to the vast majority of the cases that the council sees on a daily basis. And so I would tell you that is why the case is in the town's public interest, Mr. Jensen.
I'll accept that as the town's public interest. It's, I'm part of the town, and I always have a problem of seeing how any of these are truly in my public interest. That's,
I mean, do you want to elaborate? Is there something specific?
not just with this,
Okay, all right.
development, but pouring more and more developments in that, and I will elaborate a bit, that are constructing homes that aren't as environmentally friendly as they could be. And you and I discussed that briefly, at least I left a message for you.
Sure.
And I have a lot of trouble that, one of the companies previously that we had before the board was David Weekley Homes. They did a number of things with their houses to make them environmentally friendly. They had R19 walls, they went with solar PV, they did E3 windows, high efficiency heaters, and high efficiency AC. But your principal won't commit to that. And that troubles me that we are allowing more building, and more building is fine as long as it's the highest quality. And I just don't see that anymore.
And I would tell you that with respect to things that we've talked about before, like solar, for instance, there's not a commitment to provide active solar as part of this development plan. And the reason why is there's no money for it wired into this particular pro forma. I mean, it's just a business reality of developing this site, especially given the existing flood constraints. With respect to those other items, a lion's share of those items can't be addressed right now, primarily because my client is working on the overall development plan. They're not certain if they're going to be the ones actually building the homes. They're going to be located there. They're talking to builders in this market about things that have worked, and they're talking with developers and builders that you all have seen before. And so it's just, given the shift at the time of the zoning case that we made it to going to a townhome product rather than the apartments. And if you recall, we had a 100 kilowatt plan for solar as part of the apartments. We just haven't had the opportunity to be able to fully vet all of those things. I know who they're talking to. I think you would be pleasantly surprised if you sat down with the proposed builders for this site. I think you'd be pleased to know what they think in terms of those environmental things that I know you find very important, as do I.
And I'm concerned about the whole thing, not just the solar PV. That's, everybody calls me the solar PV person. I recognize that. I can't help myself. But I just, if it's not committed to now, chances are, I've found in the past, if it doesn't get committed to, chances are it's not going to happen. That's kind of the problem that I have here.
What I'd like to suggest at this time, based on some of the feedback, do you want to take a moment
Yes.
to confer with your client, and we'll just hang tight?
Sure.
All right.
But that's not. They built these really high what I mentioned here. We can do. And there's other builders that do it better than David Weekley. Why can't these guys? Even if you're going to go out and you have rid of these things, and you're going to find out yourself, you have to do it. Their net cost of running that house with the mortgage and everything.
Yeah, it's all okay.
And that's
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council and folks here for giving us that opportunity. In chatting with my client, we can squeeze another 10 feet of buffer, and I don't see Councilwoman Killingsworth, who I know
She'll be
who was,
right back,
who was
sorry.
asking that question. But we could probably get another 10 feet of buffer in this northeast corner adjacent to the existing single-family detached home. So we'll put it a total of 60, so 3 times what the UDO would otherwise require from a width standpoint.
All right. In addition to the 10-foot buffer addition, is there any other items that you wanted to speak to?
There's nothing else we can commit to at this time.
All right. Any final questions for the applicant? Or else we'll go into deliberation. All right, thank you, Mr. Barron. I assume you heard that bit. They added 10 feet. 10 feet to the segment, the side.
Okay.
So 50 to 60. Right. So is there discussion or possible motion? So we have one additional condition above what was presented in our packet.
I'm happy to start. I think that asking for 17 acres of the entire plot to make all these improvements is asking too much. That being said, I think that the town would benefit from holding off on this and having the whole thing be part of the development if that's possible, because then I think the leverage could be there for better buffers and could be there for better stormwater treatment. And if 40 acres of it is a pretty big fraction of that basin. So I plan on voting no.
Floor's open.
I'm willing to go next. I do agree with some of what you said, Councilman Gant. I do think that the proposed development could be good for the future for Apex, as laid out in our future plans, but I think we had a lot of discussion over things that are important for us to try to address now rather than later. And so for me, I remain concerned and will not support this this particular proposal at this time.
I guess I'd like to say that, I hope for the family of Miss Morris that she could move on with her life and be able to sell this property. It seems there's been lots of challenges along the way. I appreciate the developer. I'm looking at these buffers here. 3x the buffer on the west, plus a density increase to opaque. 3x on the east, plus density increase. South is even along the road, but they increased the density. It's still 30 foot. And then on the north side, they're 2x with an increase in density. I mean, that's significant, above what we have seen and approved on other developments. So I think they've done a lot of work in communication with the neighbors. I understand there's not there's a flooding issue, and I hope the town will move to mitigate or improve that situation as much as possible. And this is only 17 acres of the whole area over there. But thinking forward on what can be done, maybe with this site and the future site, and improving that area where it goes down under Morse Acres, I think would be a benefit to everybody in the area. I'm in favor of this. I think they've done a lot of effort to make this what everybody wants in the area, and I appreciate that effort and communication to get to this point.
Well, I'll speak up a little bit, and I've already said it. I'm concerned about the quality of the development in terms of being environmental friendly. Item 5 of the evaluation sheet that we use on this is it minimizes environmental impacts, negative environmental impacts. I don't see that happening here. That's my personal view.
Well, I'll make a motion to do you want to go? To decline the application.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to deny the application. Discussion on the motion for denial.
I'm sorry to Miss Morris.
All right, if there's no other discussion, I'll call for the vote. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no?
No.
Okay.
Motion to denial, right?
The motion was for denial. I counted 4-1, but let me just make sure. All in favor of denial indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed to denial indicate by saying no.
No.
Okay, I counted 4-1 for denial. I don't know what somebody's got to do to get a project through. Our 2045 land use map is pretty clear, and this is consistent. Staff recommended approval this time. You went back and made a lot of changes. A 50-foot buffer is quite generous. I think running low on people who have ever served time on planning board, and I've seen very few residential back-to-backs with that large of a buffer, and I think that's great. Stormwater equal to or better than what it is today, and I don't know that, and I think actually Councilman Gant said it is a pretty significant burden to put on a 17-acre project to fix a larger stormwater problem. And, you know, if any of us are the ones that own that land and are trying to develop that, I think we'd be pretty disappointed. You know, what we saw the first time, I could understand us denying it. I looked at this one, I said to myself that they've done a lot of things, and the town has put together a plan, and they've met it. The neighbors have gotten their word heard, and I thought it's been addressed. Maybe it's a timing thing, maybe it's a politics thing where there are a lot of loud voices that are telling us to stop building houses. Obviously, we don't build the houses, but when the demand is there and people want to buy a house in Apex and somebody else wants to build a house in Apex and somebody wants to live in it, that's a demand thing. People want to come here. You know, at some points, the place that your house was on was somebody else's farm. So keep that in mind as projects move forward over the coming next couple of years. All right, that one is disposed of, and we'll now move on to public hearing number 2. This is rezoning application 19 CZ 18, Maureen Hughes, 113 West Street. And presenting is Liz Lofton.
Good evening. This is rezoning case 19 CZ 18. The property is located near downtown. It is on the southeast intersection of West Street and First Street. The property currently has one single-family home. The property is currently zoned office and institutional. An existing home is a non-conforming use. From staff's research, the property has been zoned O&I since the pre-digital era, when maps were still drawn by hand. So, the applicant is proposing to rezone to medium-density residential and limit the uses to accessory apartment, single-family, and utility minor. The proposed rezoning is consistent with the 2045 land use map. Planning staff can recommend approval of this rezoning as proposed by the applicant. The planning board heard this item at their November 12th meeting and unanimously recommended approval. The rezoning is reasonable in the public interest because it will allow the existing single-family home to become a conforming use. This will also allow the property owner to make significant improvements to the home, including constructing an accessory structure in the backyard, which is currently prohibited due to the non-conforming status of the use. And the applicant is here to answer any questions as well.
All right. Any questions for Ms. Lofton? All right, great, thanks. And I see, Ms. Hughes, you signed up for a public hearing, so I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. And Ms. Hughes, all right, come on up.
Maureen Hughes, owner of 113 West Street, and I'm here to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions for either staff or Ms. Hughes? All right, not hearing any. Thank you, Ms. Hughes. I'll close the public hearing and refer the matter to council for discussion or possible motion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. All right, that passes unanimously. Public hearing number 3, this is a question of annexation, and Amanda Bunce will be presenting annexation number 674.
So this is actually an annexation and
Oh, yes,
current
and number
rezoning.
4. Yes, thank you. So we'll consider both public hearings 3 and 4 at the same time.
Correct.
Yes.
Thank you. The site is located in the New Hill community. There's actually 2 properties that are included in both the annexation and the rezoning request, 3605 and 3700 Old US 1 Highway. We have a single-family residence on the smaller parcel, and the larger parcel was New Hill Baptist Church and Cemetery. Zoning map, the church parcel is currently zoned Wake County R40W, and the single-family house is zoned highway commercial and is actually non-conforming status right now. In similar zoning, the purple is highway commercial and R40W is in the brown. The proposed zoning is mixed office, residential, retail, conditional zoning for both properties. The 2045 land use map designates both properties as office employment and commercial services, and the requested zoning district is consistent with the 2045 land use map. Just a bit of history. The purpose for this rezoning is that both properties have contaminated wells, and NCDEQ has been working with the property owners to connect to town water services, and the connection to town water requires annexation and therefore rezoning. So for the uses, we looked at uses for both properties. The uses and the conditions are listed separately in your staff report. The intent is to keep the existing uses conforming while allowing flexibility in the future for other uses, and to recognize the non-residential land use map designation here. And so for 3605, the proposed uses are single family with a corresponding density limitation of 1.75 dwelling units per acre. That's basically the existing density of the single family house.
And that number was similar to what we did nearby with the NOR zoning? Okay.
Yes, and that's also consistent with the recent land use map amendment for properties exactly in this situation. And so the uses are generally single-family accessory apartment and a handful of non-residential uses, including office, general retail services. And then architectural standards should new construction occur. And similarly, on the church property, single-family is not listed as a permitted use because there's not a single-family existing. You would have the church, daycare, medical office, office professional, retail sales, and then architectural standards that are typically offered. Staff is recommending approval of this rezoning with the conditions as offered by the applicant, and the planning board unanimously recommended approval at their November 12th meeting. The rezoning is consistent with the 2045 land use map and is also reasonable because it will allow both properties to connect to town water and maintain the existing uses while providing flexibility for future development. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Amanda, I have a question. I'm
Yes,
sorry.
go ahead.
Did you say that the current zoning of the property in Wake County is non-conforming?
So for the house at this location, some years ago, Wake County just took a swath of land through here and zoned it highway commercial, and caused a lot of single-family properties in this area to become non-conforming. And that's been a similar story in cities across America.
What does that, what impact does that have on those owners, or what does that matter?
So what that means is that the owner cannot make substantial modifications to the house. Just in the example of the West Street rezoning that we just had, the new property owner cannot build a garage or a shed in the backyard because it's a non-conforming use. If the house were to burn down, it would not be able to be rebuilt. And so there is a benefit to the current property owner with this rezoning.
Okay, that answers it. Thank you.
I just have a quick question, kind of a little off topic here, but the cemetery, is that automatically included in church and place of worship, or is that a separate issue?
It's an accessory use to the church, so it's included.
And you had mentioned contaminated wells. Do you happen to know what it was contaminated with?
The applicant is here and can speak to that.
Just curious.
Yeah, he knows the answer.
All right. Any other questions for Ms. Bunce? No? All right. Does the applicant wish to speak? Please state your name and address for us.
Mayor, Council, Michael Pfeiffer. I'm a senior geologist and project manager with S&ME in Raleigh. We are facilitating this process on behalf of NCDEQ for these folks. I live at 8915 Scotch Castle in Raleigh. Here to answer any questions.
Okay. Contamination question?
Yes.
So these wells are contaminated with petroleum constituents from former gas stations that were up here, historical gas stations up here at the intersection of New Hill, Holloman, and Old US 1.
Bad tanks or something? Are the tanks rotted out?
Yeah, essentially leaking underground storage tanks.
That was from like the 40s.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And even more recently.
Right. Okay.
So if this was to redevelop or a new house, would they have to mitigate the contamination under that piece of property?
The homeowners would not, or the property owners that are affected would not. We're working with DEQ because this is a special program. DEQ takes over management of petroleum sites like this where the owners are recalcitrant or dead or can't otherwise pay for the remediation.
But it would be mediated at that point, I would expect.
If funds allow, yes. There are thousands of these sites across the state.
Do they do ozone injection on these things?
That's certainly one remediation technique, yeah.
All right, if there are no other questions. All right, thank you. I'll open the public hearing, and no one signed up, so I will close the public hearing, refer the matter to council. Just as a reminder, if you're thinking of making a motion, we want to do annexation and rezoning. Obviously, we don't want to annex if we're not going to rezone, but we can't rezone unless we annex, so I prefer we do it in a single motion for annexation and a rezone so that it's atomic, and it either all passes or all fails.
I'll make a motion
Okay,
to annex this property and to rezone it.
all right. And second, okay, so we have a motion and a second, and for annexation and rezoning as submitted by staff. Any discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. All right, that passes unanimously. And we go to public hearing 5. This is a question of annexation as well. And Diane Kidd.
Good evening. So this is a question of annexation for the William and Marilyn Shenton property in Ramblewood neighborhood, which to orient you to the site, it is up in our northern area off of Laura Duncan Road, which is right here. And this is the Hendrick Toyota of Apex here. So they are requesting annexation in order to get town utilities. We do recommend approval of the annexation.
All right, questions?
Are they having well issues as well, or do you know?
I don't have that information. They just want town utilities. It's available and they're interested.
All right, I'll open the public hearing now, and no one signed up, so I'll close the public hearing and refer the matter to council for motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Discussion? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. All right, that passes unanimously. We will go into public hearing number 6. This is amendments to the UDO.
So there are a few amendments. The first one was requested by this body not too long ago, and that is an amendment to the continuance of public hearing standard in the UDO. Currently, an applicant has the right to request and be granted one continuance by the body conducting the public hearing, and the request by this body was to remove that automatic continuance. So that is the language before you. I'll go ahead and, since the planning board had a split recommendation at their public hearing on November 12th, state that the planning board did recommend denial of this text amendment. Those reasons are in your staff report, but included the following reasons. There needs to be ample time to respond to unforeseen conditions or changes. In the spirit of communication, the developer needs the ability to continue to work with others and neighbors. Planning board needs the ability to grant continuance as issues come up for the first time at planning board frequently. Recommend the continuance remain as is for all bodies conducting public hearings in the spirit of good communication. And there's not a high percentage of these requests, therefore the liberty is not being taken advantage of.
Can I ask you about the conversation that was had at planning board? I missed it. What is before us is a discussion of automatic continuance versus continuances in general. It sounds like what those reasons state. And was there a distinction?
So there's different types of, like you said, there's different types of continuances that are requested. There's continuances or timing of continuances. There's continuances that are sometimes asked prior to the public hearing being held. I ran some numbers since since January of 2017 to today. That only represents 5% of total cases submitted, where the request is made before the public hearing is even held. And then there are continuances that are held after discussion has happened, after the public hearing often is held, and sometimes concerns heard for the very first time by members of the public or council members. And so the applicant will sometimes say, I'd like to request a continuance so we can work this out and make changes to the case. We just can't make them at this time. It's too complicated. We would like our automatic. They want to have that assurity of that continuance. And so those are the two different times. That represents about 4.5% of the total cases between 2017 to today.
Okay.
So it's about evenly split.
And then you split those up. So hold on. So this change would it affect one or the other differently?
No, it just removes the automatic right for the applicant to have that continuance for any reason. It would mean that the body conducting the public hearing would need to find, as it states here, good cause shown.
Which is at the discretion of the body.
It's at the discretion of the body. And so that was some of the concern expressed at planning board.
And I think some of our discussion the last time, and the reason that we had requested something like this was because if someone has reason and they can explain that to us as a board, then there shouldn't be a reason why the continuance shouldn't be granted,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
In looking at this language, I don't think it solves sort of the issue that we sort of talked about. So, you know, I'm really not willing to change the language right now until it looks a little bit better. So I would, so if the planning board had issues with the being more general about only upon good cause, then it still, I think it doesn't allow people in the public to kind of predict whether they would need to come or not. I still don't think it solves the problem or the problem that we thought we had. So I'm willing to hear from other people. Because if we're not saying you have to do this by the Thursday before the agenda is, if there's no time certain or different good causes shown, then it's still not where the public can kind of predict whether they would, their item would be heard or not.
So I just would like to say that in both situations, a vote still has to occur, whether there's an automatic continuance or it's only upon good call shown. We never tell members of the public there's no need for you to come, because it's still up for the body conducting the public hearing to grant that continuance. I mean, of course, if it says automatic right, then we're assuming that the body's going to honor the UDO and grant that continuance. But we never tell people not to come to a public hearing because we just don't know how the body's going to vote. So a vote still has to happen either way.
Mayor, should we handle these one at a time, or do you want to handle all of them?
Well, considering the recommendation came with a split decision, I'd like to handle them one at a time if we could. I'd like to have a decision on amendment number 1 specifically because the planning board unanimously recommended denial of number 1 with 4 reasons. So I think we should deal with that one first, and then we can move on to number 2.
Is it unanimous? I thought it was split.
It was a unanimous recommendation.
Okay, well then.
Split between these and the other ones.
Gotcha, okay.
This and the other ones.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mayor, you will need to hold a public hearing on.
Yes.
on those.
Okay, right. Good point. So if council is okay with taking care of number 1 first, why don't we go ahead to the public hearing now, and then we can go to number 1 if we wish.
Assuming the speaker is going to be about this topic, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I'll go do the public hearing, and then we'll come back. I'll be happy to be fair and open the door at the end again.
Okay.
All right, so I'll open public hearing and call Mr. Jeff Roach. Did I pronounce it right, Mr. Roach? Mr. Roach, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the time tonight, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Jeff Roach, Peak Engineering, 1125 Apex Peakway. I am here to discuss the first one, which is the proposed amendment to 2.218 B5A, which does remove the automatic continuance. As quoted, an applicant shall have the right to request and be granted 1 continuance, which staff is recommending to be removed. After hearing the discussion tonight, a lot of my points have already been touched on either at planning board or by staff, and I appreciate Amanda with the number or the percent that have requested continuances. From my standpoint, from my company's standpoint, from my developer standpoint, we always make sure that they truly understand that asking a continuance is not taken lightly. It impacts staff schedule, my schedule, your schedule, the client's schedule, residents and neighbors that take time out of their busy schedule to come here and voice their questions and concerns. But this language also provides clarity to a complicated process going through the zoning with you guys. The removal of this language would create an additional unknown into this process. Builders and developers do not like unknowns. That scares them away from sites. Not knowing if the project will be granted a continuance to address issues only makes the process more difficult and timely. As most of you have experienced, projects typically request continuance for a number of reasons, including issues raised by residents at the last minute, issues raised by council at the meeting based on input from staff, property owners, builders, applicants, and everybody else. Issues raised at planning board, time in between planning board and town council, as in last month when planning board and town council were back to back. 24 hours is just not enough time to address any comments that planning board or neighbors have. So that automatic continuance really is something that we don't take lightly. In addition, An applicant request for a continuance is not asking council to make a motion to continue. What it's doing is making me look like the bad guy, not you to the 50 people that are sitting in the room. They're already mad at me for some reason. They're mad at a builder or developer just for being here. If it's an automatic continuance, right now the ordinance says you have to approve it. And what that does, it puts the burden back on me to continue communication with the 50 people that are sitting in the room to make sure we can work through those issues. That's all we're asking for. So I think that kind of helps us. These applicants are investing sometimes multi-million dollars into this town for future tax benefits for their projects. So I hope to give them a little bit of latitude. On a side note, next month is your last meeting. Bill, Lance, Wes, I use your first names because I've had a number of years with each of you. I really appreciate the time that I've got to spend with you guys and work through this process in Apex. I'm taking my last 12 seconds to say thank you for your time. Thank you for your passion for Apex. I hope that you look back as I do and say that Apex is a better place to live with you guys being on the board for the last 20 years, planning board, council, and everything else, your time spent. So, guys, I appreciate your time. I will leave my last, I'm out of time. So, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the time. I appreciate it. And I am here to answer any questions from my standpoint, from an engineer that does represent builders and rezonings quite often here. So, I appreciate your time, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Roach. All right, I'll close the public hearing since no one else signed up. And if it's all right with council, we'll go ahead and discuss on item number 1 independently before we hear the other 4 items. Is that all right? Mm-hmm. All right, so we've heard the case presented and the planning board's response, and we've made a few comments. Are there any further comments leading to a possible motion?
One other comment, have we heard from others in the development community about this item, since they're not here this evening? Just want to know, anyone heard from other folks?
I don't know.
I have not.
I have not.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I'll start, I guess. I tried to wait everybody out. It didn't work. I am against changing it in this manner. I could see possibly requiring the continuance request to be right after the planning board meeting, if that was a necessary thing. Because at the planning board meeting, at that point, the developer knows that he has things to do. And if he makes that request, even if it's back-to-back meetings, at least it gets it out to the public. I could see something like that, but I can't see denying this outright.
My thoughts on this were, we've had a recent example where the continuance that was automatic felt unpleasant, I guess, that there was this continuance that we couldn't control, and everybody was out there, both the developers and neighbors, everybody was taking care of kids and all that. Now that the emotion's down a little bit, I think the planning board's recommendation and that's predictable, this automatic thing, I think it's fine to keep in there. I do have faith in this council and future councils that there will be, if we change this in the future, like if this happens again, I'm gonna probably bring this up again because I didn't like the way that felt. But because I have faith in this council and current future ones granting continuances when they're appropriate. It's just not having any say in it was the part I didn't like. But I find keeping it in right now, the automatic continuance part.
I don't have much to add to what I already said. I think just having this discussion again makes sense, and that's what we're able to do. And so I am fine with leaving it the way it is because I don't think the proposed language just helps what we were trying to get at. So I'm fine with the way it is currently and not making any changes right now.
Maybe I think it's going to be hard to help the exact issue with like people not having to come out here. It would need to be some very different language.
Yeah, and so since it's really not
might
there,
be difficult to write.
But I think it's within our rights to explore things. Yeah,
if we need
and that's what we did.
Well, I'll
Make
make
a
a
motion.
motion to deny.
Okay.
Number one.
Second.
All right, so we have a motion and a second to deny or reject amendment number 1. Discussion on that? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. All right, item number 1 is rejected or denied. And we'll now move on, Ms. Bunce, to numbers 2 through 5.
Yes. So I'll go ahead and say Planning Board did unanimously recommend approval of the following 4 amendments. So I'll go through these and pause for questions after each one. The next amendment is to the home occupation standards section regarding external evidence. There's currently a restriction on the advertising of the address of the home occupation through signs, billboards, television, radio, and newspapers, and we're just bringing this into current times and adding websites and social media to the list where should not be advertised.
Can you explain real quick what home occupation is?
Yes, so home occupation is when someone uses a small portion of their home. The UDO limits that for their business, whether they're an accountant or they make crafts and take them places to sell, or, I mean, there's a variety of uses that could be allowed. It's considered an accessory to a single-family use.
I thought it was like the town was occupying somebody's home, and that didn't sound right, so.
That's fun.
But at least we're advertising on the website that we're occupying their home. Anyway, thanks.
It's a home job. Home job.
Home job, yeah.
Right, working at home. All right. Any other questions for Ms. Bunce on number 2? All right.
Okay. The next amendment is to the temporary uses and structures section, and this is very, very similar to what was before you last month. And that is because we added this language to the general standards for temporary uses and structures, ensuring that the uses would not jeopardize the public health, safety, or be injurious or detrimental to properties adjacent to. And the language that we have proposed was what's existing in this section. Legal had some tweaking that felt needed to occur to that section, but we did not advertise this for amendment at that time. Therefore, we couldn't make the change to both sections at the same time. So following legal process, we're bringing this to you now to make sure that the language is consistent. Okay. Amendment number 4 is to the design standards section, just to make it very clear that Section B here, that people know that it does not apply to 1- and 2-family dwellings per the state law change in 2015 that prohibits us from regulating architectural design for 1- and 2-family structures.
So what we do is we have some recommended conditions for these kind of structures that they can choose to take or not?
Developers voluntarily offer architectural standards, yes. And if asked, then we provide suggestions. And finally, an amendment to the small town character overlay section to increase the distance for shared parking from 300 feet to 600 feet. This standard was missed whenever we did our parking updates in July of 18. We allowed 600-foot distance to shared parking for townwide, but this little section right here was missed, and so the proposal was just to make sure that this is consistent and not have something that's more restrictive inside of our small town character area.
All right.
That's it.
If there are no questions, is there a motion?
Motion to approve amendments 2 through 5 as submitted.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a.
Did you do the full public hearing?
Oh.
I did the public hearing, and we took everybody that was on the list.
Okay.
Yeah.
Number 2 through 5.
I did the full public hearing, but yes. I mean, yes. But thanks for asking. It was confusing. Everyone who signed up spoke. How's that? All right. With that, we now have a motion and a second for approval of items 2 through 5. If there are no other discussions on that motion, then I'll call for the vote. Okay, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. All right, that passes unanimously, and we'll now take a 10-minute recess.
Thank you for your kind comments.
To me, the new bridge costs a bit of a budget crisis. And you don't hear me use it, but the price has gone up and up and up. And it would be bad for us in a lot of ways, not just bad for the town, but even optics. People are expecting that connection, and
So-
people are giving me crap. Not that it's about me, but they're giving me crap that I'm a liar because that bridge isn't built yet. Yeah, and I'm like, I've never said something to you untrue about the bridge. So where do you get off calling me that?
Okay.
But there are people who are very aware and sensitive because they're wanting that bridge built to get connectivity.
So,
And
so in this, I'll just talk about sort of predictability. We
Mhm.
it was a plan, it was predictable, there's a
Mhm.
process, we went through that.
it would be different if the cost of the bridge was lower. Then we could go, maybe we could free up
Just
some of
say
that
there are
fund.
things, and here's a couple of things,
Yeah.
and so for that.
Yeah.
And just, so
Yeah.
we would be re-voting on it.
I think ultimately, Bill needs to make a case that everybody can get on board with, and if he can't do that, somebody will make a motion, but if he doesn't get a second, then nothing happens.
So do you know that this?
I don't have any idea.
Okay, gotcha, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, if you ask for like a fall one, then that's too much. But thanks for keeping us safe tonight. You know, it seems a little comical that there be anything, you never know. 2 weeks. During this first roll. It's appreciated tonight and otherwise.
Let's see. You said one of the new elected members is this one? So. Oh, okay, that gives it away. That gives it away.
He told me that, so I was like, we're gonna kind of butt heads a little bit because I really think Hufflepuff and Slytherin are more opposite than the third floor.
Yeah.
Person.
Good to know though.
Yeah, yeah.
I can see it in the other member.
Okay.
I can totally see it.
Well, my wife was like, "You're definitely Hufflepuff." When parts of the test, I love the books. I didn't take the test so recently, and I was just like, she kept saying Hufflepuff, and I was like, "No way, I'm Gryffindor. I'm courageous."
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I know. Just so you know, Yeah.
I said something wrong. I said, you know.
Let me show y'all.
Is that you?
Oh, no, this is I see you. I see you. I see you. Yeah, see, I don't want us to read it. So I asked. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
That only controls the volume.
They stayed outside drinking.
I appreciate it. Thank you. It's everything. We were trying to do it all one time.
I actually meant to take two pictures of you tonight, before and after.
Oh. Clark Kent, yeah. I need some glasses to throw their Superman in.
Oh my gosh, okay. So is everyone ready? All right. So Mayor Olive had to leave and asked me to take over the meeting. So the next thing that we're up in is to old business 1. Councilman Bill Jensen, direction to staff to move on the proposed study relative to meeting the council's clean energy goals from the fiscal 2021 budget and work plan to the current year budget and work plan. Councilman Bill Jensen.
Well, I'll be frank, I voted for it, and I apparently didn't know what I was voting for using the 20 to 21 period. So I don't know what that cost will be for a study. I tried to get an estimate of it, and it's all over the range. But I'd like to see, I wanted to see it this budget year with the objective of possibly doing a request to the public for a bond issue. So what I'm asking here is if we can reconsider that and ask staff to at least go through the process of finding out what the price is, and then if the price is decent and we can apply it to this year's budget, then to move ahead. Because we got to go through that step anyhow. We have to find out how much is this going to cost, because we're going to let this out to a consultant of some sort. And then once we find out what it costs, make the decision to move ahead or not move ahead at that point. But I'd like us to have the opportunity to move ahead if it's reasonable cost. And the other thought was break it into 2 studies, and I know staff doesn't want to do that, but do your LED lights and the solar canopies, which are the 2 major items there. If we do a complete study, we're going to be talking about EV vehicles and all that sort of stuff as to how we're going to get down in our carbon footprint. With the changes in batteries and all that sort of stuff, I'm not sure that a study today for vehicles will apply in 5 years or 10 years, if that's what we're going to do. You know, you want to wait until there's the battery technology is better, and it's getting really better quickly. The Ford just came out with I think you probably saw that in the newspaper, with a vehicle that can go, I think it's 200 miles, and then Mustang, and then go 300. And the batteries are going to be solid state. However that works, I don't know. But they say they're going to be much more efficient, quicker to charge, and stuff like that. But that'll take place probably in 5 or 10 years. And then, you know, at that point, council can look at vehicles. But okay, I'm sorry I rambled on. The mayor's gone. Somebody has to ramble on. What I'm requesting is that we take a look at this, and if the cost is not that bad, and I don't know what that bad is, that we do that in this fiscal year. That's my request, the study, with the objective of possibly doing a bond issue in November.
Okay, so you want to propose doing this study pretty quickly, is that correct?
Yes.
Time frame?
Time frame, I think it would be based on at what point do we want to make does this council want to make a decision as to whether the council wants to go for a bond issue. And I think that's probably March. Drew, can you help me with that?
Typically, we will time our bond elections with our municipal elections, so it would be.
So you're saying
it would be 21 before we go to the voters, so we would, you know, that's why the timing in the original direction from the council made a lot of sense, because we weren't in that much of a rush. Now we can go off year and go right. There's no legal requirement that we have to be with our municipal elections. It's just that's what we've typically done, is do a bond election with our municipal. But we can do it at the same time as the general and the county.
So I remember when we talked about this before, so thank you for your bringing this back for more discussion. And some of the things I noted then and I kind of think about now is related to the budget. We just went through an extensive, budget process with workshops and preparation from staff, and I feel as though at this point, moving that predictability may be, an issue for staff to have to deal with who already have a lot on their plate, so I worry about that. That we don't have an estimate of the cost. I know that's going to take time, to do that as well. And then I also think that, this exploring this as a bond issue is, for me, not something that has been rising up as like the top, 2 or 3 issues we're hearing from people is really about, transportation, safety, some affordability, that kind of thing. So, so for me, for those things like cost, predictability, the budget predictability, staffing, and what they were anticipating based on what we decided last time. And then like the public priority for bonds, I would, if I were going to do, I would probably put something else, affordable housing or something else. We've already had transportation, but that's kind of where I am as a council member. I would like to keep it kind of where it is, where it's predictable for the staff. That's just my 2 cents.
I'm with Councilwoman Dozier as well. I'm really excited about this study and doing this work and seeing like what the results come out. But it may sound nerdy. I love that budget process and how comprehensive it is and how things are weighed against each other. And short-circuiting that, I think, is to me is not very appealing. And I'd like to have that environmental committee in place as well. I'm not sure how long that's going to take, but having that committee in place to kind of interact with this consultant or however we do it, with their expertise, I think would be really valuable too. And I think it may not be in place to go forth and interact with this study effectively if they're just named or not on there yet.
All right.
Any other discussion?
I'd like to agree with what's been said. I definitely want to see this too. I want to see the work plan done, but I don't want to rush into this. I also agree with Mayor Pro Tem's comments about, bond. We do have priorities that, the public is telling us right now. So I'd like to try to stick with those. That doesn't mean we can't explore the issue of a bond as part of this study. But, yeah.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Right now, I'd like to keep it in the budget year that we voted on originally.
Okay, and I'll go with what the council obviously have no choice. I guess the study, I thought the objective of the study was to see how much money we could save by going into these programs like the LED lights and the solar canopies. Will they pay for themselves if we go to a bond issue, and the savings that we get from introducing these different items, will they pay off the bond issue? If we go to a bond, and that's where I look at it there, and I fully agree with you that the transportation is really important. When you go for transportation, your repayment is the ease of traffic. Here, the repayment is probably money, what we'd find out. So it shouldn't impact us in it will impact us in a positive way in terms of cash flow for the town. So I'll make a motion to deny, and let's move on.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Motion passes to deny. All right, the next is unfinished business. We have Councilwoman Killingsworth. General comments?
So I have got 2 separate issues to talk about, and they're just comments from me. I'm not really looking for, comments back. But there is a Transgender Day of Remembrance vigil happening tomorrow for interest there at the state capitol from 6 to 9. So that's something to keep in mind. And second comments. This has been dwelling with me for months, and I should have said something before now, and I'm sorry that I did not. At a council meeting earlier this year, I had the support of 3 of 4 of our council members in passing a resolution supporting LGBTQIA Pride Month, and I thank you for that. I've also had quite a few Apex residents reach out and give thanks for this. Unfortunately, the dissenting member made disparaging comments not only about the LGBTQIA community, saying this community isn't relevant to Apex, but also the African American community, making disrespectful comments about Juneteenth and dismissing them as sarcasm. And specifically to our Mayor Pro Tem, Nicole Dozier, who stood up for me and who continued, the dissenting member continued to make comments as we went into closed session. I was in shock, to be honest, but I have to say I was disappointed in myself for not standing up and putting a stop to those comments. And for that, I'm sorry. As white people, we have to stop saying and doing things that belittle the struggle of Black peoples and marginalized populations. There have been other members of the community who have also spoken to Mayor Pro Tem Dozier in such a disrespectful and demeaning manner that they would never speak to the rest of us. And this has to stop. I found a quote by, and I'm probably going to say this wrong, but Ijeoma Oluo, which really spoke to me in this. If your anti-racism work prioritizes the growth and enlightenment of white America over the safety, dignity, and humanity of people of color, it's not anti-racism work, it's white supremacy. By moving forward without addressing this publicly, it has caused pain. Again, my apologies for waiting so long to address this. Every person up here deserves respect and civility. Dr. West, who currently serves on the Wake County Commissioners Board, has a saying, "Position gives you power, but your behavior gives you respect." Our Mayor Pro Tem has more than earned the respect of all of us and deserves no less treatment.
Thank you, Councilman Killingsworth, for those for those words. I appreciate that very much, and appreciate the respect that showed and the courage. Thank you for that. So the next item is new business number 1, fun run.
Can we call for a motion right away on this?
So I'm sorry. Am I throwing it to Mr. Manager? Okay.
And I won't, Mr. Jensen, I'll take 20 seconds. So Paul Peterson was the owner of Wake Zone and ICU Accounting. Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Made a phone call to me yesterday. What started out as a very well-intended idea to have a fun run in support of Western Wake Crisis Ministry. He anticipated getting a couple of dozen runners. He had to finally shut his registration off at around 125, I believe is what Paul told me. He realized that the event was bigger than he had planned, just a small gathering of people to run. So rather than just going out and doing it and then asking for forgiveness, he's here to ask for permission. Can he do this on our greenway? He's planning to have the run leave from his new location at the Publix Point Shopping Center. We'll cross Olive Chapel, the mid-block crossing, run out Olive Chapel to Kelly, down Kelly to the Beaver Creek Greenway, out the Greenway and stopping short of Townside Drive, and then reversing direction and coming back. Staggered starts, not a timed event, so we're not looking at a lot of competitive runners that are looking to try to make time. So they're not going to be, leaving the sidewalks and running down streets and all that kind of stuff to make time. Our police department will have an on-duty resource there in the morning to talk to the runners at the beginning help them across at the beginning of the race, or, I'm sorry, not a race, it's a run. And then that patrol officer will resume her or his duties, but then the runners coming back will just need to observe the crosswalk when they come back. We don't see there's any impact at all on town service. Mr. Peterson will put out the signs similar to the LDS fun run out on the Greenway, just warning people who may be using the Greenway, you may experience a larger than normal group of runners coming through. Again, just wanted the council to weigh in and say, yeah, we're okay with it, or, well, no, we don't want to do that. And Mr. Peterson is here if you have any questions of him.
Has the staff, we talked about maybe some lessons learned from the LDS run. Has the staff put together some guidelines that maybe we may or may not vote on?
Yes, sir. So they're working on a set of guidelines for, particularly that deal with the competitive 5K races. It will also tangentially catch these fun runs. The fun run that the LDS Temple had very little to no impact on anything. I think there was a phone call concerned about the large number of people, but other than that, there wasn't any real concern. The church had to contract with, I believe, just one off-duty police officer because they crossed the Peakway. While it's a marked area, it's not as well marked, and it didn't have anyway, it wasn't as good a location, so they had to have that one officer there. Again, we don't see any major problem with this. 9 o'clock in the morning on a holiday. I'm excited to see that people want to come out and support Western Wake Crisis Ministries in this way, and certainly a business owner wanting to support that particular effort. It's great.
I think such guidelines might be helpful so they don't always come to this body, and maybe somewhat different guidelines for the time races versus just the casual ones too. I think that I don't even know if it's a council thing to even have those guidelines passed, but just to have them in place so this can just happen, I think would be helpful.
Okay, so you're suggesting in the future for staff to explore some guidelines that then they can just go ahead and sign off on things without having to reach the council.
Right. I was asking if that was happening, and I guess if it's not.
No, it is. That's in process, and there likely will be some differentiation. This kind of thing that doesn't require a public resource, then the staff would be able to approve that. But if it requires the allocation of public resource, then we would come to the council. If we close a greenway or close streets and that kind of stuff.
Okay. Sure. Thanks.
All right. So, any more questions for Drew or Mr. Peterson? Well, I agree. I think it's exciting. I know about the impact on this business and the community and their welcoming spirit to children and youth, especially in your previous locations where I witnessed that as much. So this sounds great. I don't think this needs any action except for because it's, or do we need to?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the motion, Mayor Pro Tem, is to permit an organized fun run on a portion of Beaver Creek Greenway.
Sorry about that. Okay. So there is a requested motion on our add-on. Does everyone have that? So does anyone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All right. All in agreement, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposed. You got yourself a fun walk, run, no race. Thank you. All right. So it looks like the next item will be closed session with Mr. Havens, our town manager. Possible motion to go into closed session to discuss a personnel matter. Anyone do that?
So moved.
Second.
All right. All in favor? Going into closed session?
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? No opposed. We've already had. There's no work sessions. Looks like we will adjourn when we are completing our work session. So I will.
On occasion. On occasion, not, you know, don't expect.
More water?
Too much.
Oh.
This one looked like which was fortunately glad this thing.
Really?
That's
how it's acted.
I just swapped some water in the wrong. I'm right now.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Oh, that's right. Okay, yeah. Thank you, Will.
It's been slowly. All right, Sean, see you tomorrow.
So yeah, it's been getting slowly better day by day. So
Better or you're getting used to it?
yeah, I think I may just be getting used to it. I don't know. Anyway, that's what it is.
All right, well, take care of yourself.
You too. Have a good night.
Okay, you too.
Good night, Sean. All right, next comrade.
Second.
Alright, I think we're all done. And let's adjourn. Thank you, everyone. Alright, I'll bring these back then, Drew, because I like to go home. I have.
You want to leave it?
Oh, yeah, okay, I can leave it and then I'll be, okay. Because I started it and I was like, wait a minute, did I misunderstand her?
All right, so I'll let Miss Donna know that you'll stop in and see her.
Yes.
So I'm going to be in Wilson tomorrow morning.
Oh, okay, alright, thank you.
Wilson. Right. It's T in there. Wilson.